Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we bring you 8 wilderness horror stories, tales of silence, isolation, and things that should not exist. Out here the fear doesn't shout, it waits, and it remembers you. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Frozen Whisper. I grew up in northern Maine, just a few miles from the Canadian border. Winters there are long, brutal, and quiet in a way that seeps into your bones. Back then, my friends and I had a tradition we called Frost Night. It wasn't anything official, just a made-up event where we dared each other to spend the night camping out in the woods during the coldest week of December. We were 17 stupid and thought we were untouchable. That year, there were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Josh, and Ben. We packed up our gear, bundled in layers, and hiked deep into a pine forest that stretched for miles behind Tyler's family farm. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the temperature had dropped below 0. We knew the area well during the day, but at night it became something entirely different. We pitched our tents near a small clearing about an hour's hike in. The stars above were sharp and endless, and the only sounds were the occasional groan of the trees and the crunch of our boots on frozen snow. We built a fire passed around a thermos of hot chocolate spiked with cheap whiskey and joked about ghosts and skinwalkers like we always did. None of us believed in that stuff. Not really. Out there with the fire casting long shadows into the woods and the silence pressing in around us, it felt like we were the only people left in the world. And in a way, we were, until something else joined us. As the fire burned lower and our jokes started fading into tired silence, we decided to take turns staying up while the others slept. Tyler volunteered, first swearing he could stay awake all night if we bet him $20. I crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted off quickly, the cold somehow making sleep deeper. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke to the sound of Tyler whispering my name. At least I thought it was him. When I sat up, rubbing the crust from my eyes, I saw him still sitting by the fire, staring into the woods. The others were still asleep. "Did you call me?" I asked, my voice thick from sleep. He looked at me confused and shook his head. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Something felt off. The kind of silence around us wasn't just still, it was expectant, like the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost musical, just off to the right of my tent. It didn't sound like any of the guys. It was a woman's voice, close, way too close. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and unzipped the tent flap. The cold slapped me in the face. I scanned the trees with my flashlight, but saw nothing. No footprints, no movement. The whisper came again behind me this time, even though no one had moved. I spun around, but there was only darkness and trees. Tyler called out, and then low and uneasy, saying he'd heard something too. I stepped out, and we stood together in the snow, trying to convince ourselves it was just wind in the branches. But there was no wind, and the snow around us was untouched. Tyler and I stood in that eerie stillness for what felt like hours, listening. The fire had dimmed to a dull orange glow, and the cold had turned painful. My breath came out in short clouds, and every inch of exposed skin burned from the freeze. We whispered to each other, barely daring to speak above the silence. I asked if he'd actually heard a voice too. He nodded, not even trying to act tough. That told me everything. Tyler never admitted to being scared. I glanced at the tents. Josh and Ben were still zipped inside, fast asleep, somehow oblivious to the growing tension. I didn't want to wake them yet. Maybe we were overreacting. Maybe it really was just some kind of audio illusion, a trick of the cold air. But then something happened that shattered that theory completely. From deep within the trees, maybe 20 feet beyond the firelight, we both heard it again. A woman's voice, clearer now. Soft, almost kind, calling a name neither of us recognized. Not yelling, just beckoning. It was followed by a low hum like a lullaby. Then silence. I stepped toward the edge of the light and swept my flashlight across the tree line. Still nothing. But when I glanced down, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There were footprints, bare ones. A series of small, naked footprints imprinted into the fresh snow, starting at the edge of the forest and stopping a few feet from where I stood. No trail leading in, no trail leading out. Just a dozen perfect prints, as if someone had stood there, watching us. I called out, half expecting a joke, a laugh, anything. Tyler didn't speak. He just stared at the prints, then suddenly turned and rushed to the tents. I followed. We shook Josh and Ben awake, our panic infectious. They groggily sat up confused until Josh tried to speak and nothing came out. He clutched his throat, eyes wide. His lips moved, but not a sound came through. Not a whisper, not a breath. At first, we thought Josh was joking. He was the kind of guy who'd fake choking just to get a rise out of us, but his eyes were different this time, panicked, pleading. He kept grabbing his throat and mouthing words we couldn't hear. We sat him by the fire, wrapped him in a blanket, and tried to calm him down. But inside, we were all spiraling. The whispering had stopped, but the woods felt heavier now, like something was still out there, watching, waiting. Tyler kept pacing, flashlight in hand, casting nervous beams into the trees. Ben wouldn't stop asking what was going on, his voice cracking more with each question. I didn't have answers. None of us did. After 20 tense minutes of silence, we made the call. We packed up half-dressed, fumbling with frozen hands and stiff gear, and trudged back through the snow toward the trail. It was still dark, and every crunch beneath our boots sounded too loud. Josh leaned on us for support, trembling the whole way. He hadn't made a sound since waking up. When we reached the farmhouse, Tyler's mom took one look at us and knew something was wrong. She rushed us inside, called the local clinic, and had Josh looked at immediately. They couldn't find any physical damage. His vocal cords were fine. Nothing was torn. Nothing was inflamed. But he couldn't speak. Not that night. Not the next day. It wasn't until a week later that his voice came back. He still doesn't remember anything from that night. But I do. And so does Tyler. And neither of us has gone back to those woods since. 2 years passed before any of us talked about that night again. Josh never brought it up, and we never pressed him. Something about the silence felt safer, like speaking of it might invite it back. But this past winter, something changed. Tyler was home from college and asked if I remembered exactly where we had camped that night. I did. Every tree, every bend in the trail, every quiet second of that frozen terror was burned into my mind. He hesitated, then showed me an article he'd found buried in an old online forum. It was a post from a missing persons thread dated 15 years ago. The couple had vanished while cross-country skiing near the same forest. No signs of struggle, no leads. The strangest detail, the husband's voicemail was checked 3 days after their disappearance. And in the message box was an audio file, the last known recording of the wife's voice. When Tyler played it, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was the same voice we'd heard in the woods, the same gentle tone, the same eerie lullaby. But what chilled me most was the whisper at the end. A name, not one of ours, a completely different name. Someone else? Someone the voice was still calling. Tyler said one of the search teams claimed they found small barefoot prints in the snow back then, but the files were never released publicly. We both sat there for a long time, not speaking, just listening again and again to that whisper, knowing full well we were never supposed to hear it. Story 2. Symbols Beneath the Cabin. During spring break of my sophomore year in college, 3 of us decided to go hiking in the Appalachian foothills of North Carolina. It was me, my cousin Eli, and our friend Marcus. We were all from small towns and had grown up exploring backwoods trails and fishing in muddy creeks, so a weekend off the grid didn't sound like a challenge. We packed light, brought a few tents, and aimed to camp deep in the hills where no cell towers reached. On the second day, after hours of climbing through brush and switchbacks, we stumbled across something we hadn't expected. A small weathered cabin sat crookedly on a slope above a dry creek bed, half hidden behind a curtain of pine and oak. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof sagged in the middle, moss covered half the shingles, and its chimney leaned like it had been hit by a storm long ago. We figured it had to be from the Civil War era or earlier, the kind of place old hermits might have called home 100 years ago. Curiosity got the best of us. Marcus was the first to climb the broken steps and push the door open. Inside was a single large room, musty and cold, with a cast iron stove rusted in one corner and an overturned table in the center. There were broken jars on the shelves, some with odd stains dried around the rims. We agreed to set up camp nearby. Something about the place intrigued us. It felt forgotten by time, but not entirely empty. That night, after setting up our tents a few yards from the cabin, we built a fire and sat around it, passing a small flask and telling stories. The forest around us was still, and the stars were so clear they looked close enough to touch. Everything seemed calm until Marcus suggested we explore the cabin more thoroughly. Eli and I hesitated, but eventually agreed. The 3 of us stepped inside with our flashlights, kicking up dust with every step. The air felt heavier than before, like we were walking into something that didn't want us there. Marcus wandered to the back wall and started fiddling with a crooked floorboard. To our surprise, it popped loose, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. We looked at each other, half expecting bats or raccoons to come flying up. Nothing happened. Just silence. Marcus insisted we go down. Curiosity won again. The basement was more spacious than expected, with a dirt floor and stone walls lined with old wooden crates. In the center of the room was a wide circle drawn into the earth with thick black ash. Around the perimeter were faint red marking symbols none of us recognized. Triangles with eyes in the center, spirals, X-like runes. Marcus knelt to trace one with his finger, and the moment he did, Eli and I heard a soft scraping sound from behind us. We spun around, shining our lights toward the noise, but nothing moved. When we turned back, Marcus was staring at a small metal object half buried in the dirt. He pulled it out. It was a hand-forged trident about the size of a fireplace poker, the metal dark and oily, like it had never seen sunlight. He smiled, joking that we'd found some ancient cult's lost treasure. Eli told him to put it back, but Marcus just laughed and shoved it into his backpack. We should have left then. Something about that basement felt wrong, like the air itself had turned colder the second we disturbed the dirt. But none of us wanted to admit we were scared. So we climbed back up and tried to sleep. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those symbols in the dirt spinning slowly like wheels in my mind. At one point I thought I heard footsteps circling our tents, but when I peeked out, there was nothing there, just the dim embers of the fire and the looming silhouette of the cabin. By morning, Marcus was acting different, quieter than usual. He wasn't joking or teasing like he normally did. He just sat by the fire, staring into the trees, the trident still poking out of the side pocket of his backpack, like some kind of talisman. Eli noticed too. When we asked if he was okay, Marcus just nodded and muttered something we couldn't hear. Later that day, while we were hiking a nearby ridge, Marcus started drawing symbols in the dirt with a stick. At first, it was almost playful. Then he started carving them into trees with his pocket knife. The same symbols from the cabin. Eli got irritated and told him to knock it off. Marcus didn't answer. That night, while we sat around the fire eating from our packs, he said something strange. He told us he had a dream where the trident belonged to a group of people who had once lived in those hills but had been forgotten, erased. He said they weren't angry, just waiting for someone to remember. Eli and I just stared at him. He smiled and added that the dream hadn't felt like a dream at all. We both brushed it off, told ourselves he was just messing with us. But around midnight, I woke up to whispers. Not words, not voices. Just soft, rhythmic hissing. I unzipped my tent and stepped out. Marcus was gone. His backpack was still there, but the trident was missing. I called his name. No answer. Then I saw faint footprints in the dirt leading back toward the cabin. And just for a moment, I swore I saw candlelight flickering in the basement window. I shook Eli awake, my voice low but urgent. The look on my face must have said everything because he didn't ask questions, just grabbed his boots and followed me. We moved quickly, flashlights cutting through the darkness, following the trail of footprints back to the cabin. The front door creaked open without resistance. Inside, it was even colder than the night before, and the air felt wrong, heavy like wet wool. We made our way down the basement stairs, each step groaning under our weight. The moment we reached the bottom, we stopped cold. The ash circle had been redrawn, but more elaborate now, stretching to the walls. And there in the middle sat Marcus, cross-legged, the trident resting across his lap. His eyes were open but glassy, and he didn't move when we called to him. I took a step forward, but Eli grabbed my arm and pointed to the floor. Around Marcus, tiny red candles burned in a perfect ring, flames perfectly still despite the draft. And behind him, drawn on the far wall in something dark and wet, was the largest symbol yet, a triangle with an eye and a tear falling from it. We didn't say a word. We didn't try to pull him out. We just turned and ran. When we came back with the local ranger the next day, the cabin was empty. No signs of Marcus. No signs of the circle or the symbols. Not even the staircase. Just a rotting floor. The ranger said we must have imagined it. Said the cold does strange things to the mind. But we knew better. Marcus was never found. 6 months later, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a padded envelope, and tucked carefully within, it was a single photograph, old, faded, like it had been buried for years. It showed the basement of the cabin exactly as we'd seen it that night. The circle, the candles, the trident, and in the center, a man sitting cross-legged. But it wasn't Marcus. It was someone else, entirely dressed in clothes that looked like they belonged to another century. I flipped the photo over. Written in neat, shaky cursive was one line: he never left. None of them ever do. I showed Eli, and we sat in silence, neither of us knowing what to make of it. We tried to trace the package, but there were no postmarks, no stamps, no tracking. It was as if it had simply appeared. 2 weeks later, I dreamed of Marcus for the first time. He was standing in the cabin doorway, older eyes glowing faintly red, whispering something I couldn't understand. When I woke up, the photo was gone. So was the envelope. Eli doesn't dream anymore. He says he won't let himself. I haven't been back to those woods. and I never will. Story 3. The Man Who Never Blinked. It was the first warm weekend of the season, and my girlfriend Leah and I decided to take a long hike near Crater Lake in Oregon. We were both students at a small college nearby and needed a break from campus life. The trail we chose wasn't particularly popular, which was part of the appeal. We packed a lunch, brought our dog Riley, and planned to be out just before sunset. The air was crisp but not cold, and the pines swayed gently as we walked. Everything felt peaceful, normal. We were laughing, talking about finals, stopping now and then to let Riley sniff at mossy logs or chase shadows. Around the halfway point, we found a clearing with a view of the distant lake, blue and quiet in the light. That was when I noticed him. A tall man standing on the opposite side of the trail, maybe 30 feet away. He was wearing all black sweatshirt jeans, even boots, and despite the sun, he had his hood up. What caught my eye was not just his size, but the way he was standing completely still, facing us. His arms hung loose by his sides. Leah hadn't noticed yet. I turned to tell her something felt off, but when I looked back, he was already gone. I stared at the spot where he had been confused. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling in the brush, not even the faint crunch of pine needles. Just empty forest. Leah noticed my expression and asked what was wrong. I told her there had been a man standing just across the trail watching us. She looked, but of course there was nothing there. Riley was still sniffing around like nothing had happened. We shrugged it off and kept walking, though something about the moment clung to me. A few minutes later, as we rounded a bend in the trail, I saw him again. This time farther up ahead, maybe 50 feet, half hidden behind a tree. Still wearing black, still perfectly still. His face was pale, and though I could not see it clearly, I knew he was staring at us. At me. I tried to act calm, told Leah quietly that the man was back. She looked where I pointed but saw nothing. Her eyes narrowed with worry, but she didn't argue. We picked up the pace, walking quickly now. Riley began to act strangely, sticking closer to us, tail down, ears flat. The woods around us seemed quieter too, like everything was holding its breath. I glanced over my shoulder. The man was there again, closer this time, just standing at the edge of the trail, watching. And what struck me, what made my stomach turn, was that he never blinked. Not once, not even when the sunlight flashed across his eyes. We started moving faster, not quite running, but no longer walking for pleasure. The trail wound tightly through the forest, with thick brush on either side, too dense to move through easily. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, and each time I saw him, always the same distance behind us. Always still, always watching, never blinking. Riley growled now and then, low and uncertain, like he sensed something he didn't understand. Leah squeezed my hand, whispering that we needed to get back to the car. I nodded, heart racing. But the trail curved sharply ahead, and when we reached the bend, I froze. He was there, standing in the middle of the path, only 20 feet away. Same black hoodie, same dead-eyed stare. He was tall, unnaturally tall. Easily 6'7", maybe more. His skin looked wrong, like it was stretched too tight. His lips were curled up slightly in a grin that didn't belong on a human face. We backed up slowly, trying not to make sudden movements. Riley barked once, then whimpered and crouched low to the ground. I fumbled in my pocket and grabbed my keys, holding them like claws between my fingers. I told Leah to go left through the brush. She hesitated, but when I stepped forward, the man didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink. That was what finally made us run. We crashed through the undergrowth branches, scraping our arms' roots, tripping our feet. Behind us, I never heard footsteps, never heard breathing. But I knew he was following, not running, just always there. Always just close enough. When we finally stumbled out of the trees near the parking lot, I looked back one last time. He stood at the tree line smiling, watching, still not blinking. We didn't speak as we jumped into the car. Leah slammed the doors shut while I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. Riley leapt into the back seat, whining and pacing nervously. When the engine finally turned over, I backed out fast, nearly clipping a tree as we peeled out of the lot. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. Leah stared out the window, pale and silent. Neither of us spoke until we were nearly halfway back to town. Even then, all she said was, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. It had felt like a dream, except it wasn't. When we got back to her apartment, we locked the doors and closed every curtain. We didn't go to class the next day. I didn't sleep at all that night. The strange thing was when we checked the trail website the next morning, the park had been temporarily closed due to a fallen tree. But we had seen no signs of closure, no warnings. I started to wonder if anyone else had seen him, if anyone had ever reported something similar. For days after, I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A tall figure too still to be natural, always just outside of clear view. Riley wouldn't go near the windows. We moved a few months later, trying to put it behind us. But sometimes I catch Leah staring blankly into the distance, like she's listening for footsteps. I know I still am. About a year after we moved, I found an old folder while organizing photos on my laptop. It was labeled Crater Lake Hike, one I hadn't opened since the day it happened. Most of the pictures were normal trees, Riley playing in the snow, Leah smiling beneath the pines. But then I clicked on one I didn't remember taking. It was blurry, tilted, probably an accidental shot. In the background, just beyond the trees, was a shape. A tall, dark figure standing perfectly still among the trunks. Zooming in made my stomach twist. The face was pale, eyes wide, and there it was again, that impossible expression. Not angry, not curious, just smiling. And the eyes, wide open, unblinking. I didn't show Leah. I couldn't. I deleted the photo, emptied the recycle bin, but for days afterward, the image wouldn't leave my mind. Then one morning, I found Riley sitting stiff by the back door, growling at nothing. And later that night, when I turned off the lights to head upstairs, I caught a glimpse of something in the yard. A tall shadow standing motionless between the trees, watching. No sound, no movement. And even through the glass I could tell. His eyes were still open, and he still hadn't blinked. Story 4. The Trail That Warped Time. It was mid-June when my two closest friends, Claire and Jonah, joined me on a hiking trip near Zion National Park. We had all just finished our last year of college and wanted one last adventure before life pulled us in different directions. The plan was simple: drive out, early hike. A lesser-known trail Claire had read about online, spend the day taking photos, and be back at the car before sunset. The trail was supposed to loop through a canyon known for its strange rock formations and isolated beauty. It wasn't an official route, but locals called it the Switch, and according to a few forums, it was peaceful, scenic, and rarely traveled. That was exactly what we wanted. We packed light, brought plenty of water, and left the paved roads by late morning. The desert air was dry and buzzing with heat. The sun bounced off the red rocks, and the occasional breeze stirred the dry grass along the trail. Spirits were high. Claire kept joking about how we were going to find ourselves in the wild. while Jonah focused on photographing lizards and cactus blooms. Everything felt normal, familiar. But the deeper we walked into that canyon, the stranger things began to feel. Subtle at first, almost like time itself was slowing down. It started with little things. The sun, which had been directly above us when we began the loop, seemed stuck in place, barely shifting, despite what felt like over an hour of walking. The air grew heavier, like it was pressing against our skin. At one point, Jonah checked his phone for the time, but it was dead even though he had charged it that morning. Claire laughed it off, saying the desert had a weird way of messing with your senses. But I wasn't so sure. The trail itself began to twist in odd ways. Landmarks we had passed only once before appeared again slightly altered. A split in the trail we had chosen to avoid earlier was suddenly right in front of us again, as if we had somehow circled back without turning. Claire pulled out her paper map, but it didn't match what we were seeing. The canyon walls seemed taller, steeper. Shadows stretched too far for the angle of the sun. Jonah grew quiet, and I noticed his breathing getting shallow. He admitted he felt like we were being watched, though there was no one else for miles. That was when we saw something ahead. A figure just at the edge of the trail, walking in the opposite direction. It looked like Claire. Same clothes, same backpack. Moving away from us, but never getting farther. Claire froze, eyes wide, and whispered that she hadn't told anyone what we were wearing today. We stopped walking. The air was still. Then the figure turned its head ever so slightly, just enough for us to see that its face was wrong, blurred like an unfinished painting. And then it vanished behind a bend in the trail. We stood frozen, staring at the spot where the figure had disappeared. Claire whispered that she wanted to go back, but when we turned around the trail behind us, it didn't look the same. The dry grass was gone, replaced by patches of dark moss and smooth, unfamiliar stones. Jonah stepped forward, trying to retrace our steps, but after only a few yards, he stopped and looked back at us with wide eyes. "This isn't the way we came," he said. I looked around. The landscape had changed. The sky still glowed with that frozen afternoon light, but the colors seemed off too pale, like we were walking through a faded photograph. The air was silent. No insects, no birds, no wind. Just our breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath our boots. We kept walking, hoping to find something familiar. That was when Claire's phone rang. She jumped, startled. The screen showed an incoming call from her own number. She answered it with trembling hands. At first, there was only static. Then a voice, her own voice, soft and distorted, whispering, "Don't trust it. Don't stop." The call ended. The phone powered down on its own. Claire dropped it like it had burned her. We all looked at each other, unsure what to say. Then Jonah pointed ahead. Another split in the trail. 3 paths this time, none of them marked. I took a photo with my camera to keep track of our position. The timestamp read 11:41 a.m. We had started the hike at 10:00, but it felt like we had been walking for over 4 hours. I checked my watch. It was stuck at 11:07. None of the clocks were moving. Time was unraveling or folding in on itself. We weren't just lost in the canyon. We were caught in something else entirely. Something that wasn't letting us leave. Panic started to set in. Claire kept looking over her shoulder, convinced that the thing we saw earlier was still following us. Jonah wanted to take the leftmost path, arguing it seemed like it sloped downward, maybe leading us out. I didn't care which way we went as long as we moved. We chose the left trail and started walking fast, trying not to run, trying to stay together. The trail twisted sharply and narrowed the canyon walls, closing in tighter than before. The air thinned. Every breath felt like inhaling through a straw. I checked my camera again, desperate for any sense of normalcy. The timestamp was still stuck, 11:41 a.m., no matter how far we walked. But when I flipped through the photos, something caught my eye. In the background of a shot I had taken earlier, there were 3 figures standing far behind us on the trail. They looked just like us. Same clothes, same posture, like reflections frozen in the distance. I didn't show Claire or Jonah. I didn't need to. I think they felt it too. Eventually, we found a familiar rock formation, one we remembered from earlier that morning. We ran the last stretch back to the parking area, hearts racing. The sun was still high, unnaturally bright. At the car, I checked my phone. It said 11:42 a.m. We had been out there for nearly 5 hours, yet only a minute had passed on every device. Jonah threw up. Claire cried quietly in the back seat. We drove home in silence, not speaking about what happened. Not then. Not for a long time. 2 weeks later, I finally uploaded the photos from the hike onto my laptop. Most were distorted colors, 2 sharp angles stretched unnaturally, like the camera had captured something it wasn't meant to. Then I found the photo of the 3 figures again. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The middle figure, supposedly me, had no face. Just a smooth, blank surface where eyes and a mouth should have been. I called Claire right away. Her voice trembled when she picked up. She had something to tell me too. Jonah was gone. He'd left a note saying he had to go back and see if it was real. That was 2 days ago. No one had heard from him since. The park rangers hadn't found his car. Claire admitted she'd been having dreams of the canyon, the splits in the trail. The static-filled voice whispering again and again, "Don't stop. Don't stop." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I checked the memory card in my camera again. Every image was gone, except one. A photo of the trail. 3 paths, 3 shadows walking away. One of them still had no face. And this time, I was the one in the middle. Story 5. The Screamer on Black Elk Ridge. I had always found peace in the Black Hills of South Dakota. As a park ranger stationed near Custer, I often spent my days patrolling quiet trails, taking in the wide skies and the whispering pines. But there was one place I rarely visited alone, Black Elk Ridge. It was not marked on most maps, just a long, narrow rise that curved along the edge of the deeper forest. Locals avoided it, often brushing it off with vague warnings about mountain lions or unstable rock. I never bought into superstition, but even I admitted something about that ridge always felt wrong. Last fall, I decided to hike it anyway. The weather was calm with pale clouds sliding across the sky, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and pine needles. I brought my dog Copper, a loyal shepherd mix who had hiked hundreds of miles with me over the years. He was steady and quiet, a perfect trail companion. We reached the base of the ridge around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. I had hoped to catch the view from the summit before dusk, maybe take a few photos for the station's social page. It was just another quiet evening in the hills. Or at least, that was what I thought. As we started up the ridge, Copper stayed close to my side, ears perked, but not in his usual curious way. It was more like he was listening for something. I paused a few times to scan the trees, but there was nothing unusual, just the fading light and the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. Still, the deeper we climbed, the quieter everything became. No birdsong, no insects, just the steady crunch of our boots and paws on dry leaves. The air began to feel thicker, like we had stepped into a space that did not quite belong to the rest of the forest. At the halfway point, I checked my watch. It had only been 30 minutes, but it felt like we had been hiking for hours. Copper began to lag constantly, glancing behind us. His body was tense. When I reached out to reassure him, he flinched, something he had never done in all the years I had known him. We pressed on. A few minutes later, he stopped to take a photo of the sunset, bleeding through the trees. As I raised the camera, Copper growled low in his throat, then backed up and let out a sharp, unfamiliar bark. I turned and followed his gaze. There was nothing there. Just trees and falling light. Then from somewhere ahead, high on the ridge, came a sound I will never forget. It was not an animal, not a coyote or a mountain lion. It was human, but wrong. A scream, long drawn out and filled with something I can only describe as agony. It echoed down the ridge like it had been waiting for us. Copper's ears flattened. He whined once, then bolted behind me, tail tucked tight. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt afraid of the woods. I called out, thinking maybe someone was hurt, but my voice sounded hollow against the silence. The scream had faded, but its echo clung to the ridge like fog. Copper pressed against my leg, shaking. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't stop staring up the trail ahead, his eyes wide and locked onto something I couldn't see. I hesitated. Protocols said I should investigate, but instinct told me to turn around. That scream hadn't been normal. It hadn't sounded like panic. It had sounded like something pretending to be human. Still, I forced myself forward. Every step felt heavier, like gravity was pulling me down. The trail narrowed, cutting through tall rock walls where the last of the sun barely reached. As I turned a final bend near the summit, Copper stopped walking. He let out a soft whimper and refused to move. I crouched beside him, listening. That was when I saw it. About 30 feet ahead at the edge of the trail, something stood in the shadow of a pine. At first, it looked like a person. Tall, hunched slightly, wearing what seemed like a torn coat. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape looked all wrong. Two thin arms, too long, its head tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle. Then it turned. Slowly. The face was gaunt, stretched tight over bone. Its mouth hung open wider than it should have. And from that open maw came the second scream, so loud, so sudden, it knocked me backward. It felt like it was tearing through my chest. Copper yelped and tried to run, but I held his leash. The thing didn't move toward us. It just stood there screaming like it was caught between pain and rage, its body trembling with each sound. I fumbled with my flashlight, aiming the beam at it. In that instant, the creature snapped its mouth shut, turned, and vanished into the trees without a sound. And just like that, the woods were silent again. Too silent. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I turned and ran, dragging Copper behind me. My boots slipped on loose dirt and gravel, but I didn't stop. Every breath felt like fire in my chest. My mind kept replaying that scream, that impossible face. Copper whimpered the whole way down, but he stayed close, no longer pulling against the leash. We didn't speak. We didn't listen. We just moved. When we finally reached the base of the ridge, the forest seemed to exhale. The wind picked up again. Birds chirped. Distant insects buzzed. The world had returned to normal like nothing had happened. But Copper wouldn't stop shaking. Back at the station, I logged the hike like any other, leaving out the encounter. What could I even write? Saw a humanoid figure, heard unnatural screaming, ran away. They'd think I was losing it. That night, Copper refused to sleep inside. He sat by the doors, staring into the woods, growling low whenever the wind shifted. I barely slept. Even now, months later, I can still hear that sound sometimes. Not loud, just faint, like something screaming from far, far away. And every time I do, I wonder if it remembers me too. About a month later, I got a call from a local hiker. I knew a guy named Paul, who often volunteered with search and rescue. He had heard through a friend that I had been up on Black Elk Ridge recently and asked if I had seen anything strange. I hesitated, then told him I had heard something just enough to see if he would say more. He went quiet, then said he'd gotten a photo from a trail cam he had set up just below the summit. It was taken the same day I had been up there. The image showed the narrow ridge trail mostly empty, except for a shape near the edge. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw it. A tall, hunched figure, mid-scream mouth, wide open eyes, black and bottomless. And next to it, barely visible, was me. I was standing a few feet behind it, staring straight ahead, unaware. Paul asked me if I'd seen the other figure in the image. I told him no. I hadn't seen anyone else up there. He paused again, then said the trail cam had taken another picture a minute later. This time the ridge was empty, except for one thing. My backpack, just lying there in the dirt. But I had never dropped it. Story 6. Scratches on the walls. When I was 10 years old, my cousins and I spent part of every summer at our grandparents' ranch in southern Arizona. The house was old, nestled between dry hills and scattered cacti with creaky floors and a wraparound porch that moaned whenever you stepped on it. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, where the air smelled like dust and old wood, and the only sounds at night were the coyotes howling in the distance. My grandparents were kind but firm, and they had strict rules about bedtime, especially when it came to sleeping in the old guest room on the west side of the house. That room had heavy wooden shutters that never opened, and a thick door that stuck every time we tried to close it. They never said why, but they always made sure we were in bed before dark and that the door was shut tight. That summer, there were 5 of us kids, me, my brother, and 3 cousins. We thought the rules were silly and treated our overnight stays like little adventures. We would whisper ghost stories, sneak cookies under the covers, and dare each other to peek out the windows after lights out. It was all harmless fun, at least until the night the scratching started. That was when everything changed. Looking back now, I wish we had taken the rules more seriously, because something out there was watching, and it wanted in. The first night we heard it, we thought it was a tree branch brushing against the house. A soft, repetitive sound near the far corner of the guest room wall, slow and faint like something tapping or dragging along the outside. We were lying in our sleeping bags, telling dumb stories when my cousin Lily sat up and asked if anyone else had heard it. We hushed and listened. At first there was nothing. Then it came again. A long, slow scrape like nails running down wood. We all looked at each other, eyes wide, but trying to play it cool. My brother joked that it was probably a raccoon or maybe a bobcat. That was enough to make us nervous, but not scared. The desert was full of critters after all. We ignored it and tried to fall asleep, but I remember lying awake for a long time, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. The next morning, we ran around the side of the house to look for tracks. There were none. No paw prints, no scratch marks, nothing. Just dusty dirt in the heat of the rising sun. That night, the scratching came back. Louder, faster. This time it moved, starting at the west wall and creeping toward the door, then stopping right beneath the window. Something about the rhythm felt deliberate, too precise, like it was testing, listening. We didn't sleep much that night. And when we woke up, there were faint smudges on the glass, long, thin streaks that hadn't been there before. On the third night, things escalated. We had told our grandmother about the sounds, but she brushed it off gently, saying the desert had a way of playing tricks on tired minds. Still, when she tucked us in that night, she paused longer at the doorway than usual. She didn't smile like she normally did, just looked at us and said firmly, "Keep the door closed, no matter what." We nodded, half nervous, half excited. It felt like a story coming to life. But what happened that night wasn't like a story at all. It was real, and it was terrifying. We were barely an hour into sleep when the noise started again. Not scratching this time, pounding. Heavy, deliberate thuds against the wall as if something was slamming its fist over and over into the wooden frame. Lily screamed. My brother jumped up and turned on his flashlight. The light swung wildly around the room as we scrambled into a corner, all of us frozen, too scared to open the door or call for help. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had started. For a moment, everything was dead silent. Then came a softer sound, a scraping like nails across glass. Slowly, all of us turned toward the window. There, pressed against the outside of the pane, was a hand, not human. Thin, elongated fingers with too many joints, and 6 of them. They slid slowly down the glass, leaving streaks that curled like symbols. We stared unmoving until the hand vanished. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking to sunlight and silence. When we told our grandfather what we had seen, he said nothing. Just went outside, circled the house, and came back inside, pale and shaking. That night, he boarded the windows shut. Not with nails, with salt. And he never said why. After that night, none of us wanted to sleep in the guest room again. My grandparents didn't argue. They moved us into the living room where we slept on the floor, surrounded by lamps and soft music playing from the old radio. No one mentioned the boarded window. No one asked why the salt was replaced every morning. We just accepted it. The scratching never came back. Not exactly. But every few nights, I'd wake up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, measured, circling the house. Sometimes the doorknob to the guest room would rattle softly like someone or something was checking to see if it was still locked. My grandfather stayed up late those nights, sitting in his chair with a shotgun across his lap and a Bible in his hand. He never said what he was waiting for. We never asked. When summer ended and we left the ranch, I felt relief heavier than any sadness. I never went back to that guest room, even years later. And now, even as an adult, I still wake some nights to faint scratching on the wall outside my bedroom. I live in a city apartment. There are no trees, no animals, just brick and silence. And sometimes I wonder if it ever really stayed behind. Last year, my grandfather passed away. We gathered at the old ranch for the funeral, the first time all of us cousins had been back together since that summer. The house was quieter now, older somehow, like it had been holding its breath all these years. After the service, I wandered through the rooms, drawn by memory more than intention. Eventually, I found myself outside the old guest room. The door creaked open with a push. It was just as I remembered. The thick shutters still bolted faint salt lines around the frame. But something new caught my eye. Along the far wall where our sleeping bags once lay, the wallpaper was peeling. I stepped closer. Beneath the paper, carved deep into the wood, were rows of scratch marks, long, deliberate, layered over years. Some were fresh. At the bottom, nearly hidden beneath the newest lines, was a single word scratched over and over. My name. I staggered back, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. That night, back at my hotel, I checked the walls twice before going to bed, but I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, just as I began to drift off, I heard it. Soft, familiar, a faint scratching. From inside the wall, followed by a whisper, a name, my name. Story 7. The Thing Behind the Tree. When I was 16, my best friend Tyler and I spent most weekends exploring the woods behind our neighborhood in rural Oregon. It was the kind of place where the forest never quite ended, thick with moss-covered trees, narrow deer paths, and the occasional forgotten trail marker from decades past. We called it the Back 40, though it stretched far beyond that. It was our escape, a place where we could talk mess around or just walk in silence and let the quiet settle over us like a blanket. That fall, we decided to camp overnight for the first time. We packed light sleeping bags, granola bars, a flashlight, and an old canvas tent Tyler borrowed from his uncle. We hiked out about 2 miles past the last visible trail, deep into a grove where the trees grew close and the light barely made it through. We set up camp near a small clearing with a lone dead tree at the edge. Its bark was pale and twisted, and neither of us liked looking at it for long. Still, we laughed off the unease. We were kids, and the woods were our playground. But that night, something watched us from behind that tree, and it never blinked. The first sign something was wrong came just after midnight. Tyler had fallen asleep quickly, snoring lightly inside the tent, but I lay awake listening to the forest. At first, it was peaceful, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustling of wind through the branches. But then, everything stopped. No owls, no insect, just silence, thick and unnatural. That was when I heard the twig snap, not far, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the tent. I held my breath, listening harder. Then came another snap and another slow and deliberate circling the edge of our clearing. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The dead tree loomed in the moonlight, pale and crooked, and behind it, half concealed by the trunk, was a shape. I couldn't see its face, only the outline of a head and shoulder, still as stone, staring directly at our tent. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was a trick of the shadows. But when I looked again, it was closer. Same position, same stillness, just a few feet nearer. I zipped the tent shut, shaking. I tried waking Tyler, whispering his name, but he groaned and rolled over. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, the tree was the same, but the ground behind it was disturbed, like someone had been standing there for hours, watching. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had imagined it in the dark. Maybe the silence and shadows had played tricks on me. Tyler laughed it off when I told him, blaming it on too much caffeine and late-night ghost story. Still, I insisted we move the camp. He agreed, half joking, but I saw the way he avoided looking at the tree as we packed up. We hiked another mile deeper into the woods, farther than we had ever gone before, and found a new spot beside a narrow creek. It felt better at first, brighter, safer. We set up camp again and spent the day fishing and talking, trying to shake the strange tension from the night before. But that night it came back. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a faint scratching sound, not on the tent, not nearby, but inside my head, like something was dragging nails along the back of my skull. I sat up fast, heart pounding, and saw Tyler already awake, sitting cross-legged and pale. He whispered, "It's here again." I looked out through the thin mesh of the tent window. The clearing was dark, lit only by moonlight. And there it was, the same shape, the same outline, standing behind a tree just beyond the creek, watching. It didn't move, it didn't blink, but somehow it was closer than before. And this time we both saw it. We held our breath, frozen, afraid to make a sound. The thing didn't step forward. It simply shifted, its head tilted at an impossible angle. And we heard it not out loud, but in our minds. A low whisper, not words, just presence, heavy and cold. And that's when we knew it wasn't just watching, it was waiting. We didn't speak, we didn't move. For what felt like hours, we just sat there, trapped inside the tent, staring at that tree and the thing behind it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I must have passed out because the next thing I remember is waking to sunlight, bleeding through the canvas, and birds chirping again. Tyler was already up, pale and jittery, stuffing gear into his backpack without a word. I didn't argue. We packed in silence and hiked back toward the trailhead, checking over our shoulders every few minutes. But the forest felt normal again. Peaceful even. Like nothing had happened. We didn't tell anyone. What would we say? That something watched us all night and whispered into our heads? No one would believe it. We tried to go back to normal, tried to laugh it off eventually. But something had changed. Tyler stopped going into the woods altogether. I kept hiking, but never alone, and never near that tree. Weeks later, I went back to the clearing near the creek during daylight, just to prove to myself it was fine. Nothing unusual, no footprints, no sign of anything. But behind the same tree, I found something new. A small pile of stones stacked in a perfect spiral, and in the center, a strip of faded fabric. From Tyler's backpack. I never told him I went back, and I never touched the stones. I just turned and walked away, knowing deep down that whatever it was, it still remembered us. 2 years later, Tyler went missing. He'd been doing better, or so I thought. We were both in college by then, living in different states, but we kept in touch. Then one day, his sister called me. He hadn't come home after a weekend camping trip. They found his car parked near a trailhead just an hour from the same forest we used to explore. No note, no signs of struggle. Just an empty tent and his boots left by the fire pit, perfectly placed side by side. I didn't tell anyone what we had seen back then, not even the search team. But I drove out there alone and found the clearing. The same creek, the same tree. It looked exactly as it had before. Quiet, peaceful. But behind the tree, the ground was disturbed again. A fresh spiral of stones. And in the center, something new. A small wooden carving crudely shaped like a man. And on its back, scratched deep into the wood, was my name. I didn't take it. I didn't touch it. But as I turned to leave, the whisper returned. Not in the air, in my head. Clear this time. 3 words. You're next, Ben. Story 8. The Park Stalker. During the fall of my freshman year in college, I started jogging in the mornings at a park near campus. It was a small wooded space tucked between old residential streets and a set of disused train tracks. Quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where fog clings to the grass and the trees seem to hush the world around them. At first, it felt like a hidden gem. I'd get up at 6, pull on my hoodie and headphones, and run 3 laps around the winding dirt trail before most people even woke up. The stillness helped clear my head before classes. There were a few regulars, an older man with a beagle, a woman doing Tai Chi, a kid on a bike too early for school. But otherwise it felt like mine. Then maybe 2 weeks in, I noticed someone new. A tall man in a long, dark coat, always standing at the far end of the path, just off the trailhead, half hidden behind the trees. At first I thought he was just another walker, maybe waiting for someone. But he never moved. He was there when I started running. And still there when I finished, not jogging, not stretching, not even sitting. Just watching. No phone, no dog, no motion. I tried not to overthink it. Cities are weird and people do strange things. But after 3 straight days of seeing him in the same spot, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in that park before. Watched. On the 4th morning, I decided to test something. I changed my routine, woke up an hour earlier, and went to the park before the sun had even started to rise. The fog was heavier that day, curling low around the trees, and the path was slick with dew. I ran my usual laps, earbuds in, but no music playing, just to stay alert. For the first 2 laps, everything felt normal again. No one on the trail. Just me and the soft sound of my shoes crunching dirt and gravel. I started to think maybe he wasn't there this time. Maybe it was nothing. But as I rounded the final bend, I caught sight of him, the same figure barely visible through the trees. This time he was closer, standing just beyond the split rail fence that bordered the path. Still not moving, still just staring. My stomach dropped. I didn't stop running, but I turned my head slightly as I passed, pretending to glance behind me. That's when I realized his head turned with me. Not a twitch, not casual. He was tracking me. I picked up my pace and finished the loop in record time, trying to act like everything was fine. But my hands were shaking when I got back to the dorm. Later that night, as I replayed the morning in my head, I remembered something small, but strange. The man's coat, it was the same one he had worn every day. Long, heavy, not made for jogging, not even for walking. And his shoes. They weren't sneakers or boots. They looked like old dress shoes, worn and cracked, like they hadn't moved through mud or grass in years, just stood, waited, watched. I stopped running for a few days after that, told myself I needed rest, that midterms were coming, and I had too much on my plate. But the truth was, I was scared. That silent figure in the trees had wormed his way into my thoughts. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining him outside my window, waiting under the streetlight coat soaked from the fog. I avoided the park completely. Then one evening, just before dusk, I saw him again. Not in the park on campus. Standing across the street from my dorm by the bike racks, not moving. My heart seized in my chest. I blinked and he was gone. That night, I made a decision I regret to this day. I needed answers. So the next morning, just after sunrise, I returned to the park. This time, I didn't run. I walked slowly, scanning the trees. And sure enough, there he was. Same spot, same posture, watching. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. My hands were cold and damp, but I kept moving until I stood on the other side of the wooden fence. We were maybe 20 feet apart. I called out something dumb like, "Hey, you okay?" He didn't respond. I took one step closer, then another, and that's when he moved. Not forward, not toward me. He turned slowly, revealing his face for the first time. It wasn't a face. Where there should have been eyes, there were dark, sunken pits. His mouth was too wide, too still. Skin stretched thin like paper over bone. And then, without taking a step, he was suddenly inches from the fence, his face only feet from mine. I stumbled backward and fell. The last thing I remembered before blacking out was the sound of his breath. Shallow, rattling, not like a living person, like something trying to remember how. I came to with a jolt, flat on my back, in the wet grass, heart racing so hard it drowned out every sound. The morning fog had thickened, and for a second I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered. The face, the breath. I scrambled to my feet, expecting him to be looming over me. But the space behind the fence was empty. No figure, no footprints. Just cold silence and the lingering weight of dread clinging to the air like static. I didn't wait. I sprinted out of the park, lungs burning, branches scraping at my arms as I tore through the trees toward the main road. I didn't stop until I reached the sidewalk, collapsed on the curb, and dry heaved until my vision steadied. No one believed me, of course. Campus security chalked it up to stress, maybe a panic attack, maybe a bad dream. I stopped jogging after that, avoided the park, changed my route to class, moved dorms the following semester. But sometimes when I'm out late or alone on a quiet street, I get the feeling again. That pressure, that stare. And once, just once, I swear I heard shallow breathing behind me, slow struggling, trying to remember how. A year later, I transferred schools. New city, new apartment, new start. I didn't tell anyone about what happened at the park. It felt safer that way, like leaving the memory behind might keep whatever it was from following. Life settled down. I stopped looking over my shoulder. But then 2 weeks into the semester, a package arrived. No return address, just my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a single item, an old photograph. It showed a group of students, maybe from the 1950s, standing in front of the same park trailhead I used to run. All smiling, except one. In the back row, half hidden behind a tree, stood a man in a long dark coat, face indistinct, watching. On the back of the photo, scrawled in faded ink, were 4 words. "You've already seen me." I dropped the picture and stepped away, heart thudding. But I couldn't help myself. I looked out my apartment window. Across the street, under the shadow of a flickering street lamp, was a figure. Tall, still. Coat hanging like it always had, not walking, not waving, just waiting, watching, like he never left, like he never needed to. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.